The heat of May 1869 clung to the western Louisiana hills like a curse, and Briarwood plantations simmered under it like a sealed cauldron. From afar it looked like splendor, white pillars, ancient oaks, endless fields of cane shimmering in the sun. Up close it reeked of sweat, fear, and blood. Colonel Nathaniel Whitfield, a defeated Confederate who refused to admit defeat, ruled Briarwood like a petty king. The whip still hung behind his armchair, a relic of war that never left his hand. For him, the Confederacy's loss had never reached the fields. Here, war continued daily. Among the quarters were the people bound to his land. Samuel Carter, the carpenter whose hands had built both furniture and coffins. His eyes carried a grief so heavy he rarely met another's gaze. His sister Miriam, fire-eyed, carried the kind of courage mistaken for fearlessness. Yet hers was the courage of someone who knew fear and refused to bow to it. Old Ezra Cole, blind, sat tapping his stick and fingering his bone beads. Once a drummer for Confederate ranks, he now whispered, "The ground is speaking." Most dismissed him as mad, though curiously, his muttered warnings often came true. Then Jonah Reed, barely 20, scarred by molten cane syrup, seared into his arm. The scar was both wound and banner, marking him with a silent rage that burned hotter than the fields themselves. Against them stood the overseers, the Briarwood Four. Thomas Briggs, drunkard and braggart, his whip his only boast. Miles Garrison, cold and precise, lashing because order demanded it. Reuben Harker, a giant who swung the whip faster than cattle hooves. And Jeb Collins, lips stained with tobacco, eyes sharp as knives, smiling like death itself. That night, silence was broken. Samuel sat before the whipping post where countless backs had split, when Ezra whispered, "The earth is calling. It says, the time has come." Samuel did not answer. His fist clenched the rusty nail hidden in his sleeve. Miriam stepped close, pressing into his palm a strip of cloth stained faintly with blood, the last relic of their youngest sister, sold away at 6 years old. "We don't beg. We don't flee," she whispered. "We take back." The wind hissed through the cane like whispers. The soil exhaled damp and heavy, as though it too bore witness. Around them, men and women sat in silence. But within that silence, a tribunal convened. The night itself was judge, jury, and executioner. Blood memory stirred. Chains groaned in memory. And Samuel knew, when the first blade flashed, there would be no turning back. This was the breath before the storm, the hush before history cracked open. Briarwood would not see another ordinary night. The ground had spoken, and now, someone would answer. The quarters of Briarwood were more scar than shelter, more wound than refuge. Low cabins sagged under patchwork thatch, dripping with every storm. Smoke clung to the walls, mingling with sweat, damp earth, and that other scent that never faded. The stale iron of old blood, the memory of flesh once split by whips. To outsiders, it was only hovels. To those within, it was home, if home could mean a box where memories were kept locked and festering. By day, overseers barked and lashed. By night, silence wore thin. Teeth ground, muffled cries seeped from dreams, chains clanked though no chains remained. Ezra Cole would say, "The ground remembers." Samuel Carter often sat before the whipping post, staring at the scars cut deep into wood as though listening to them. Miriam knew why. From there, Samuel could see limps, hear whispers, mark glances that lingered too long. From there he could hear. Ezra, blind, heard more than any. With bone beads between his fingers, he muttered, "The earth is speaking, children. It says, the time is near." Jonah Reed didn't hear earth. He heard his own heart, thumping against the burn scar etched into his arm. Each beat whispered, you owe blood." His silence was sharper than a knife. His eyes alone made men step aside. Miriam was fire, not hearth fire, but fire of memory and fury. Every night she spoke, of a sister sold at 6, of a husband hanged for a glance. Some said her stories only deepened despair. Samuel knew otherwise. Her words planted seeds. Each tear, each tale, was a seed of vengeance rooting in the soil of every listener. The four overseers were scars of their own. Their footsteps thickened the air, froze children's cries, bowed adults' heads. But this night, the cabins held a silence of another kind, the silence of listening, not of fear. They were hearing the same thing, the ground itself trembling. For the third time, Ezra whispered, "The earth says, it is time." At dawn, proof. A young man lay dead, whipped as an example. No name, no marker. Samuel dug the grave. As he lowered the body, a root pushed up through the earth, twisted like a finger pointing to heaven. He looked at it, then up, conviction burning. Ezra was not mad. The earth was speaking. Miriam caught his gaze, clenched the blood-stained cloth in her fist. "If the earth has spoken," she breathed, "then so must we." That night, 45 gathered in the abandoned corn crib cellar. Breaths heavy, no words wasted. Samuel stood at the center, a rusted spike in his hand. There is no escape, no mercy to beg, only one thing left: take back. Ezra tapped his staff, a drum beat from memory. Miriam raised the bloody rag. Jonah lifted his scarred arm, and the crowd whispered as one, steady as a tide: take back. The air grew thick, but not with dread. Instead, a strange release settled. Relief, as if they had waited lifetimes for this night. The earth had spoken, and Briarwood was listening. That night, the corn crib cellar became the strangest courtroom Briarwood had ever known. No polished benches, no robed judge, no jury box, only torchlight flickering across scarred faces. 45 men and women seated in a circle, their silence so deep it seemed to pound in time with their hearts. Samuel Carter stood at the center, spine rigid, a rusted spike clutched in his fist. He needed no gavel. His gaze alone stilled the room. His voice rasped but rang like iron. "No court exists for us. No law protects us. Tonight we make the law. Our law." Ezra Cole tapped his cane 3 times against the dirt. The hollow thuds like war drums. The trial began. Absalom, the blacksmith, broad as a barn door, spoke first. He told how Overseer Thomas forced his 12-year-old son to lift glowing iron, burning the boy's hand to uselessness, the fever taking him that winter. "I want Thomas to feel fire in his own hands." Heads nodded. The verdict was clear. Rachel, bent from decades under cane loads, lifted her arm to show a scar. "Briggs poured boiling syrup on me, and the mistress laughed. She said it would make me remember. I remember. Tonight he will remember." The circle murmured its assent. Jonah Reed stepped forward, scarred arm glistening in torchlight. "Reuben shoved me into the vat. I lived. My brother did not. He drowned in sugar fire. Reuben thought I would forget. I remember every breath he lost." His voice broke. The crowd answered as one. "We remember." Then Miriam Carter rose, holding aloft a rag stained long-dried crimson. "My sister was 6 when Miles signed the paper that sold her. She died on the road, no grave to mark her. This cloth is all I have. I want him to scream the way her bones screamed." A low growl passed through the circle, the sound of grief hardening into steel. Ezra's cane struck the earth again. "The ground has heard. Now it is our turn." Samuel's voice filled the hovel. "We do not kill for sport. We do not drink on revenge. Each name is a sentence. Each sentence carried out by our hands. A life for a life. A lash for a lash. Our justice, ugly, unwashed, but true." The answer came back like thunder. "True." Silence followed, not fearful but binding, a covenant spoken without parchment. They had stepped past the edge of fear. With fear buried, anything was possible. Miriam leaned toward Samuel, whispering loud enough for all, "Brother, who first?" Samuel raised the spike, his eyes flint. "We begin with the hand that whipped most. His death opens the road for the rest above." Wind hissed through the cane like ghostly applause. Below, 45 souls rose together, no longer field hands but jury, executioners, the living sentence against men who once thought themselves untouchable. The plan had begun, stitched in whispers, sealed in blood, draped in the dark like a shroud waiting to fall. After the midnight tribunal, Briarwood was no longer silent. 45 souls stepped out of the corn crib cellar as though they had signed a covenant written in blood and memory. No paper, no seal, only eyes, only resolve. And from that night on, every breath, every step served one purpose: to reclaim justice. Samuel Carter stood at the center. He used no fiery speeches, made no promises of glory, just one blunt truth. With a plan, we live. Without it, we die. The words alone chilled the room. Jonah Reed became their eyes and ears. Overseers dismissed him because of the burn that scarred his arm, and that contempt turned him into a shadow moving unseen. He tracked every habit: how many cups of liquor Thomas drained when Briggs nodded off on the porch, what hour Miles left quarters to inspect the fences. Each detail became a line in an invisible map pointing toward death. Miriam Carter gathered the women in the kitchen. "Wars are won through the stomach," she said with a cold smile. They gathered bitter roots, ground them to powder, slipped it into molasses cakes. Not enough to kill outright, but enough to slow hearts and cloud minds. Absalom the blacksmith honed blades in silence. Crude knives hidden under horse dung and straw, where even the dogs could not sniff them out. "Dung masked the iron better than gold ever could," he rasped. Ezra Cole, blind but sharp-eared, became their sentinel. Sitting on the porch, he tapped his stick, listening to every staggered footstep, every drunken curse. "When their feet drag, the night is ours, why not?" he murmured. The plan grew like a quilt stitched in secret, each seam tightened by silence. By day the whip still cracked, but by night the cellar swelled with urgent breaths. Twice discovery brushed close. Miriam caught hiding the root powder, Reuben storming in. She tossed a fistful into the stew and smiled. "A new spice to sweeten your meal." He swore and left. The kitchen exhaled relief. Jonah, too, was nearly caught, loitering near a drowsy Briggs. "What are you skulking at, boy?" Briggs barked. Jonah mumbled, "Just gathering kindling." Head bowed. Briggs spat tobacco and drifted back to sleep. Jonah clenched his fist, heart pounding. "Your day is coming." At night they pieced the fragments together. "How many cups for Thomas?" "2, then half a pipe. He drifts off. Add powder, and he's slow as a sick ox." "The knife is ready." One stroke, then gone. Ezra tapped his stick. "The first death must be remembered, not swift, not silent. The earth must keep it." The list hardened. Thomas to fall in the carpentry shed. Briggs next after the molasses bread. Miles dragged to the abandoned well. And last, Whitfield himself, beneath the whipping post where he once ordered so many deaths. Miriam raised the blood-stained cloth scrap, her voice sharp as steel. "Our justice will walk from shadow to light, name by name, lash by lash, death by death." That night, wind tore through the cane fields like a ghostly laugh. The crescent moon hung pale and cracked like a broken tooth. And at dawn, Samuel Carter stepped into the carpentry shed, where Thomas Briggs waited, unaware that the first sentence of Briarwood's tribunal was about to be carried out. At noon the next day, Briarwood plantation sweltered until the air felt thick as molasses. The drone of insects carried like a funeral dirge. Most overseers, after their meal, sprawled lazily under the trees, bottles in hand, muttering nonsense. But Thomas Briggs had his own ritual. He liked to visit the carpentry shed to watch Samuel work. In truth, he came only to stand there, arms folded, spitting tobacco juice on the floor and hurling insults. For Thomas, power was not management. It was savoring another man's humiliation. Samuel Carter knew the routine well. Inside the shed, he gripped his hammer, each strike ringing steady as a drumbeat. Yet today the sound was different. It was not the sound of crafting, but of a tolling bell. The door slammed open. Thomas staggered in, his white shirt stained with liquor, eyes bloodshot. "Carter," he slurred, "that wagon wheel done yet? Or you just drag your feet to dodge work?" Samuel did not turn. He kept hammering. Thud, thud, thud. Thomas stepped closer, smirking. "Answer me, you useless cripple. Or did you forget your tongue?" This time Samuel lifted his gaze. His eyes were cold, dark as quenched iron. "No," he said, voice low and heavy. "I remember everything." Before Thomas could react, Samuel swung. The hammer cracked across his jaw, teeth shattered like kernels in hot oil. Thomas reeled, choking blood mixed with tobacco. Samuel did not shout, did not tremble. He worked with calm precision, like a craftsman at his bench. He dropped the hammer, seized the sharpened iron spike he had hidden for weeks, and drove it into Thomas's arm, the arm that had once wielded the whip without pause. "Feel that?" Samuel hissed, pressing harder. "That's what you gave my boy when you forced him to lift a hot iron." Thomas screamed, flailing, but Samuel overpowered him. He slammed him down, binding his wrists with rope already prepared. The shed filled with the crack of splintering bone, the shrieks muffled beneath the steady clatter of tools and the whisper of wind outside. Jonah lingered by the door. When the cries erupted, his lips curved into a faint smile. "Justice has begun," he murmured. Inside, Samuel broke Thomas's fingers, one by one. Crack, crack, crack. With each snap, he recited, "This for the boy who died of fever. This for the wife I never saw again. This for Miriam's sister sold away." Thomas squealed, begging, "Mercy! I only followed orders." Samuel leaned close, voice a blade against flesh. "We beg too." "Did you ever listen?" Thomas gagged, eyes wide with terror. Samuel raised the hammer one final time and brought it down on his skull. A heavy crack, then silence. The world stilled. Samuel's breath thundered in his ears as he stared at the body. Not the sneering overseer, but a carcass, stripped of power. He shoveled ash over the corpse, dragging it into the cellar's dark. To Samuel, this was not concealment. It was burial, of a sentence carried out. When he emerged, Jonah waited. He handed Samuel a scrap of cloth, the signal agreed upon. "One is done," Jonah whispered. Samuel nodded. Overhead, storm clouds gathered, though no rain had fallen. The cane fields whispered in the wind, their rustle like a rasping laugh. And deep within the quarters, every heart beat with new fire, hotter than Briarwood's merciless sun. That night, Miriam passed around molasses bread in the hidden cellar. No one ate for hunger, but each took a bite as silent ritual. Ezra tapped his stick, voice rasping like prophecy. "One has fallen. The earth has drunk. The storm has only begun." No one doubted. No one faltered. Their eyes gleamed brighter than the torches. They understood. This was no longer a question of if. It was the only road forward, and there would be no turning back. The next morning, Briarwood Plantation buzzed like a hornet's nest struck with a stick. Overseer Thomas Briggs had vanished without a trace. His whip still hung on the wall of the carpentry shed. His half-finished glass of liquor sat untouched on the table. But the man himself had evaporated like smoke. Colonel Whitfield barked orders and cursed, but nothing turned up. Even the bloodhounds, usually vicious, whimpered and avoided the shed, as if they had scented something dragged straight from the underworld. Of all the overseers, Briggs, the one notorious for his fiery temper, reacted the fiercest. He stood in the yard, eyes darting, barking at the slaves gathered before him. "You think you can hide him? Think we won't find out?" 3 young men were dragged forward, pale as ash. They had nothing to do with Thomas, just unlucky enough to be seen near the carpentry shed the day before. Briggs paced before them, his whip cracking against the ground like a venomous serpent. A boy of 16 trembled, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Which one of you hid him?" Briggs roared. "Speak, and I'll spare you." No one spoke. They knew the truth. Speak or stay silent. The whip would fall either way. From the crowd, Miriam Carter stooped and picked up a small stone. She tossed it lightly so it landed at Samuel's feet. It was the signal they had agreed upon. Samuel inhaled deeply, then stepped forward, feigning a stoop to pick up a piece of wood. Briggs spotted him and snarled, "You! Get over here!" Samuel obeyed, head lowered, playing the obedient servant. But inside, the cord was drawn tight, ready to snap. That afternoon, the plan went into motion. Jonah shadowed Briggs and reported that he would be making his usual round near the old storage barn by the pond, where he often snuck off to nap after drinking himself full. Miriam carried a basket of molasses cakes, left where he would find them, a gift for the overseer. Beneath the cloth lay a small, sharpened blade. Briggs dropped into a chair with a grunt, stuffing cake into his mouth between curses. Liquor burned in his gut. The bitter root hidden in the cake slowed his pulse, fogged his mind. "Damn cake tastes like straw," he muttered, never realizing his heart was already faltering. At the doorway, Samuel appeared, holding a piece of timber. He said evenly, "Sir, I brought this here to men." Briggs glanced up, sneering. "Good timing. Drop it and get out." But Samuel didn't set it down. He stepped closer, eyes gleaming. Briggs frowned. "What the hell are you doing?" Samuel slammed the timber onto the table. The jug of liquor shattered, shards scattering. Briggs flinched, dazed. Just enough time for Jonah to spring from behind, looping a rope around his neck. "Hold tight," Samuel hissed. Briggs bucked with the strength of an ox, dragging Jonah with him. But Miriam was already there. She pulled the hidden knife from her basket and drove it into his leg. Briggs roared, collapsing onto one knee. Samuel tackled him to the ground, pinning his shoulders. Briggs panted, eyes bulging. Don't do this! I was just doing my job!" Miriam snarled back, voice sharp as steel. "Your job? Was it your job to scald Rachel's arm with boiling syrup? Was it your job to hang my husband from a tree?" Briggs's mouth snapped shut, his terror plain. Samuel bent close, whispering with icy calm. "Every lash you dealt returned in bone." He wrenched Briggs's wrist back slowly until the bone cracked like dry twigs. Briggs howled. Miriam, without flinching, drew her knife across his other arm, a deep, deliberate cut that sprayed hot blood across the dirt. Jonah, his scarred arm trembling, pulled the rope tighter, teeth clenched. "This is for my brother," he spat. The trial lasted no more than 10 minutes. To Briggs, it was an eternity in hell. He begged, he cursed, he promised change, but no one listened. When his breath faltered, then stilled, Samuel released him. Silence hung thick. Miriam handed Samuel the blood-stained rag, their token. "Two now," she said coldly. "The storm is rising." They dragged the body to the abandoned well by the pond, once used for tossing refuse. This time the refuse was an overseer. Ezra later murmured, "The earth has drunk again, but it is not yet full." By morning, Colonel Whitfield was seething, sending his men scouring every corner of the plantation. Yet the more he searched, the more unsettled he became. First Thomas, now Briggs. The two remaining overseers, Miles and Reuben, began to glance over their shoulders with every step. Briarwood had become a cauldron on the fire, boiling and ready to spill over. And in the shadows, Samuel and Miriam were already preparing the next sentence. Overseer Miles, the coldest and cruelest of them all. After Briggs's death, the air at Briarwood hung heavy as lead. Overseer Miles Garrison stalked through the quarters with eyes sharp and suspicious, his boots striking the dirt like coffin nails. He was unlike Thomas or Briggs, hot-headed and reckless. Miles was cold, deliberate. He struck not from rage but from principle, and that coldness made him the most terrifying of them all. He didn't curse often, nor did he need to shout. One glance was enough to let a man know the whip would soon follow. People said Briggs was a cobra, Thomas a rabid dog, but Miles was a blade of ice, cold, sharp, and unflinching. Samuel knew bringing him down would take cunning, not brute strength, and the plan came from the one least expected. Rachel, the old widow with a bent back and silver-threaded hair. "Let me be the bait," Rachel said during the meeting. "He thinks me weak, invisible." "That's my strength," Miriam's face tightened. "But you," Rachel cut her off, eyes gleaming with hard pride. "I've lived more than 50 years and swallowed enough humiliation to choke the earth. If I can trick him to that dry well, then my life will have meant something." No one argued. They all knew. When a woman once whipped until her bones cracked, spoke in such a tone, nothing could move her. The trap was set on a stifling noon. Rachel stumbled in the fields, clutching her side, groaning as if in pain. Another worker rushed off to fetch Miles. "Pathetic weakling," Miles muttered, striding over. His white shirt was crisp, his straw hat neat, so unlike the rumpled chaos of Thomas or Briggs. He crouched, voice flat as stone. "Get up!" There are no breaks, Rachel whimpered. I can't. I can't stand, sir. His brows furrowed as he leaned closer, hand reaching to yank her to her feet. That was the moment. From the tree line, Jonah tightened the rope around his neck. Miles choked, thrashing, but before he could cry out, Samuel and Absalom surged forward, pinning his shoulders. Miles fought with feral strength, slamming his head into Samuel's face, splitting his lip, but Samuel refused to yield. Blood trickled down his chin as he snarled, "Easy now, overseer." "This time you're the one on the ground." Miriam stepped in, an oil lamp casting harsh light over Miles's paling features. Her voice cut like glass. "Do you remember Eliza?" Miles's eyes flickered. "Eliza, 6 months pregnant. You beat her until she collapsed. You dragged her into the fields while she screamed. Her baby died inside her. Do you remember?" His mouth opened, but the rope cinched tighter. Jonah growled, arms trembling as he pulled. "Remember or not, you'll pay." They dragged him to the abandoned well beyond the fields, a place long used for dead animals, and whispered as a grave for the nameless. At the rim, Miles still kicked, eyes bulging. Samuel pressed close, murmuring in his ear, "This is where you threw the bodies of those denied even a name. Now the earth will speak yours." Jonah pulled hard. The rope snapped taut. A crack echoed, bone-breaking clean. Miles's body went limp. Samuel and Absalom gripped his arms and flung him into the dark. His body struck stone with a hollow thud, reverberating like a funeral drum. Rachel stepped forward, trembling, her hands clasped. "For my stolen children. For Eliza. For all the ones erased." The group stood in silence, listening to the wind sigh through the well's mouth like a mourning breath. Before leaving, Miriam thrust a dry stalk of sugar cane into the earth beside it. No headstone, no carved letters. Just a small marker, so anyone passing by would know. A soul had been swallowed here. That night in the cellar, Ezra tapped his cane 3 times. His hoarse voice rasped, "The earth is fuller now, but it has not finished calling." On the 4th night, Briarwood Plantation turned into an invisible battlefield. 3 overseers had already vanished. Thomas, Briggs, Miles. The whole estate buzzed with whispers. The slaves murmured. The guards trembled. But the most striking sight was that of Colonel Nathaniel Whitfield himself. Once proud as the king of the plantation, he now wore a gray, sleepless face, his eyes bloodshot. He stalked back and forth inside the mansion, clutching his whip like a talisman. Every night he roared, "I'll find you all. I'll hang every last one of you." The crack of his whip against the wooden floor echoed like ghosts of past lashings. But what Whitfield failed to understand was this. Fear no longer belonged to the slaves. It had crossed over to him. The plan to capture Whitfield unfolded that very night. Samuel, Miriam, Jonah, and Absalom led the charge. Ezra stayed behind in the quarters, tapping his cane 3 times as the signal. When the sound rang out, 45 people moved at once, silent as wolves in the dark. Whitfield sat in his study, half-empty bourbon bottle at hand, his eyes fixed on a plantation map. He scrawled lines across the paper, muttering, "They want war. I'll show them what blood looks like." The door burst open. Samuel stormed in, Miriam and Jonah close behind. Whitfield leapt up, whip flying, but Samuel seized it, ripped it free. The whip hit the floor with a hollow clatter. "You bastard!" Whitfield roared. But before he could strike, Absalom surged from behind, slamming him into the chair. Ropes, already prepared, bound his wrists and ankles. Whitfield thrashed, his face purple with rage. "You dare! I am your master!" Miriam bent close, her eyes blazing like fire. "No, Whitfield, you're no master anymore. Tonight, you are the accused." They dragged him into the yard, tying him to the very whipping post where hundreds had once been beaten to death. Around him, 45 figures stood silent, a jury without smiles, without tears, stern as stone. Whitfield sneered at the circle of faces. "This is your justice? A pack of savages daring to judge their master?" Ezra struck his cane on the ground, his hoarse voice rasping like a drum beat. "We judge not for color. We judge for blood." A woman stepped forward, pulling down her dress to show a long scar across her back. Her voice trembled, but stayed firm. "Colonel Whitfield, this is the lash you gave me when I failed to cut Cain fast enough." A man followed, pointing at his ruined eye. "This is from the cup you hurled. It blinded me forever." Accusation followed accusation. Each word sliced away the mask of honor Whitfield had worn for decades. His bravado cracked, his voice faltered. I was only keeping discipline." Miriam raised a red-hot branding iron, firelight flaring against her face. She pressed it hard against his chest. The stench of burning flesh filled the night as Whitfield's scream tore through the air. When she pulled it back, an X smoldered on his skin. "This mark," Miriam hissed, "is no longer yours. It belongs to the truth." The crowd remained silent, but their eyes burned with release, not fear. Samuel stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Whitfield. "You hanged Miriam's husband here. You stole my child, and now you sit where you belong." Before justice, Whitfield panted, sweat pouring down his face. For the first time in his life, he realized he had no power left. His whip was gone, his wealth meaningless, and even the name Harrowfield, once his pride, was nothing but a curse. Ezra struck his cane again, the beat sounding like a verdict's drum. "Tonight the earth has heard. Your blood will not vanish. It will stain this post forever." The whipping post still smoked, and Whitfield sagged against it like a half-burned scarecrow. But the 45 did not stop. The true verdict was not the brand seared onto his chest. It was what was about to happen to all of Briarwood. Samuel Carter lifted his head toward the endless rows of cane. In the moonlight, they stood like an army of mute soldiers, drinking sweat and blood day after day. His voice was quiet, yet every ear caught it. "It's time to give the earth what it's been asking for." Miriam passed a torch to Jonah. The young man with the scarred arm raised it high, the fire flickering like an animal's eyes in the night. A bitter, relieved smile crossed his lips. "This flame, it should have been burning long ago." They divided into groups, each carrying torches. To an outsider, it might have looked like some strange dance of fire. In truth, it was the funeral rite of a system. The first torch touched the dry cane leaves. Shh! Flames raced upward, red and ravenous. A second, a third. Within moments, the fields were a sea of fire. The crackling of burning cane sounded eerily like lashes on a back. But this time, not on flesh, on the very crop that had fueled Whitfield's fortune. Someone laughed through tears. "Sounds familiar. Only now the whip's falling on the right master." Miriam stood, eyes reflecting red light, remembering the night her husband swung from a rope while Whitfield smirked. Tonight the cane swayed in fire, and Whitfield had nothing left but ash. Ezra tapped his cane in rhythm with the blaze, his hoarse voice rising. "This is the drum of the earth. Listen, it's singing for the lost souls." The flames spread faster than rumor. Dogs barked, guards scrambled. But how could men quench a fire that vast? One guard tried hauling water from the well, only to cry out, "Devil's work! This is the devil's fire." Samuel's reply cut through the din. "No devil. This is justice." The devil wore fine clothes and carried the whip. A ripple of laughter followed, strange, half bitter, half liberated. As the inferno rolled outward, the light carved every face sharp against the night. No one trembled. Hands clasped, 45 bodies stood as one. Children giggled, thinking it a festival. One cried, "Sky lanterns! Sky lanterns!" Miriam pulled them close, her eyes wet. "Yes, lanterns! And they'll guide us forward in the great house." Whitfield sat bound, eyes bulging at the ruin of his life's wealth. His throat tore with screams. "You'll all die! The fire will devour you before me." But Samuel turned, his voice deep, steady. "No, Whitfield. We've lived in fire all along. Tonight, it's your turn to feel it." A crash thundered as the cane barn roof collapsed, sparks exploding like fireworks. Someone shouted, fist raised, "Tonight the earth has eaten its fill." Yet amid the cheers, tears fell too. Rachel knelt beside a little girl and whispered, "Look, child, remember this. Never again will we be slaves." Never. By midnight, the fire raged high. smoke billowing like a volcano. From the nearby town, people gawked, murmuring, "Briarwood is burning. The slaves have risen." Ezra smiled faintly at the word. "Not an uprising," he whispered. "A baptism by fire." Samuel looked around, the glow igniting every face. He understood. This wasn't destruction alone. It was a birth. At sunrise, Briarwood Plantation was nothing but ashes. The cane fields that once stretched green and endless were now a blackened carpet, the air thick with the stench of smoke. 45 souls stood at the edge, eyes red from the haze but burning with pride. They had done the unthinkable, burned away their chains with fire of their own making. But their triumph was short-lived. Dust rose on the horizon. From the direction of town came the thunder of hooves, dozens of mounted soldiers, rifles slung, bayonets glinting like shards of steel. Behind them rattled field artillery, wheels grinding the earth with a sound like a predator's growl. Jonah Reed narrowed his eyes, his scarred hand tightening around the hilt of his knife. "They came quicker than I thought." Samuel Carter clamped a steady hand on his shoulder. "Freedom never comes slow, Jonah. It just arrives with guns." The soldiers under Captain Harlan Pierce advanced. Pierce, once a Union officer, now sworn to order by iron discipline, lifted his spyglass. Through the smoky haze, he saw the line of 45, backs to the ashes, standing tall. He smirked. "They look like lunatics. Let's show them who the real madmen are." Pierce gave the signal. The line of rifles leveled. The command cracked the air. "Ready!" But Samuel had planned for this day. He split the 45 into 3 companies. Absalom led the first, hidden in the tree line, pits and sharpened stakes waiting beneath loose brush. Miriam and the women made the second, torches soaked in oil ready to turn dry grass into walls of flame. Samuel himself, with Jonah and the strongest men, stood front and center to hold the army's gaze. The first volley of gunfire split the morning. Lead tore earth. Smoke stung the air. But almost instantly, horses screamed. Half a platoon plunged into the spiked pits. Riders thrown, men and beasts writhing in agony. "Light it!" Miriam shouted. Torches flew and grassland erupted. Fire curled into walls that boxed the soldiers, smoke choking their ranks. Men shouted, coughed, broke formation. Samuel surged forward, axe in hand. He met a soldier head-on, steel against wood. His blow landed deep into the man's shoulder. Blood sprayed, weapon clattered. Jonah leapt from behind, driving his blade into another belly, whispering through clenched teeth, "For my brother." Pierce bellowed from horseback, "They're devils! Cut them all down!" But fear was already eating his line. Bullets could not drown the fire. Bayonets could not pierce the fury in those eyes. They weren't fighting slaves anymore. They were fighting wrath itself, decades in the making. At the battlefield's edge, Ezra Cole beat his cane against the ground in steady rhythm. Amid smoke and gunfire, the sound was uncanny, like a war drum from the grave. A young recruit froze, pale as chalk. He dropped his rifle, stammering, "Drums! A devil's drums!" and bolted. The fight stretched on through the burning day. Gunfire crackled, screams tore the air. Men clashed with axes, clubs, bare hands, torches. No retreat, no surrender. Miriam locked eyes with a hulking soldier as his bayonet lunged. She twisted aside, pressed her iron brand, still hot from the hearth, into his throat. His scream cut the sky before he crumpled. Miriam stood panting, eyes still blazing with defiance. Samuel caught a bayonet slash across his arm, blood dripping. He roared through the pain, swinging his axe again. "No retreat! This land is ours." By late afternoon, the sun bled red over the horizon. The battle raged on, neither side yielding. But one truth was clear. The soldiers had not expected their field hands to rise as warriors. Captain Pierce, face twisted in fury, stood in his stirrups. "So be it. If they want war, we'll bleed them to the last drop." Smoke and fire wrapped Briarwood like a shroud. Of the 45, only a few dozen still stood, their blood soaking into the ashes of the cane. But none had bowed. And as dusk bled into night, one question remained, hanging heavy as the smoke. Would their defiance carve justice into the soil, or would it be buried forever beneath it? The fiery afternoon ebbed into night, and Briarwood sank into an eerie silence. No more gunfire, no more cracking whips, only the wind through charred stalks and the groans of the wounded. Of the 45 who had risen, barely half remained. They gathered around Samuel, binding wounds with rags and ash, their faces drawn with pain, but their eyes still burning. No one spoke of surrender. "Tomorrow," Samuel murmured, "they will come again. And we cannot just hide. We must stand tall. One last time." No cheer followed, only steady nods. They all knew this would be the final stand. At dawn, a thick fog cloaked Briarwood. The ground, black with ash and slick with blood, reeked of smoke. Shadows moved silently into line, every hand clutching some weapon. Axes, hoes, sharpened wood, even irons reheated in small fires. From afar, the drumbeat of soldiers carried through the mist. Hundreds of boots struck the earth in unison, shaking the ground. Captain Harlan Pierce led them, ranks aligned, bayonets gleaming like shark teeth. Miriam gripped Samuel's hand, whispering, "If we die, then dying like this is worth it." Samuel only nodded, eyes fixed forward. The charge came with a roar. Steel clashed, cries rang out. The last battle had begun. Jonah was first to leap, knife flashing. He drove it into a soldier's chest, blood spraying as both toppled. Rising, his face drenched red, his eyes blazed. "For my brother!" he cried and hurled himself forward again. Miriam swung her heated iron, pressing it across the soldier's face. His scream split the mist as he collapsed. She staggered, breathing hard, but never stepped back. Samuel met Pierce head-on. The captain's saber carved across Samuel's shoulder, blood pouring, yet he did not falter. With a roar, Samuel swung his axe, slamming Pierce back. "You're a rebel," Pierce spat. "No," Samuel hissed. "I'm a survivor." They circled in the haze, steel against wood, each strike booming like thunder. At the edge, Ezra Cole sat by the ruins, his cane tapping steady beats. Amid chaos, the rhythm sounded like war drums from the grave. A young recruit froze, terror in his eyes. "The devil's drums," he gasped, dropping his rifle before fleeing. Blood soaked the fog-drenched soil. One by one they fell, yet none ran. Rachel, the bent widow, took a bullet to the chest. She toppled, eyes fixed skyward. With her final breath, she whispered, "At last, I am free." Jonah, skewered by a bayonet, collapsed. Samuel caught him as he fell. Jonah's hand clutched his, voice faint. "Don't let them forget us." His smile lingered as his eyes closed forever. Miriam was knocked down, blood running from her brow, but she rose again and screamed louder than the rifles. "This is our land. No one takes it back." The cry stunned even the soldiers, if only for a heartbeat. Pierce, enraged, drew his pistol and fired. The shot tore into Samuel's shoulder. He staggered but did not fall. With the last of his strength, he swung his axe into Pierce's chest. The captain toppled, choking, eyes wide in disbelief. "Impossible!" he gasped, then fell silent. Samuel dropped to his knees, blood pouring. Around him the quarters smoldered, the fields lay in ruin, comrades dead or dying. Barely 20 still stood, but in their eyes was not fear, only a strange peace. Ezra tapped his cane one final time, the hollow sound echoing like a funeral drum. "The earth is full," he whispered. "Now it will keep us in memory." As the fog broke, the first sunlight fell on their blood-stained faces. It was no triumphant victory, but a tragedy etched in flame and sacrifice. Yet it was also the loudest declaration they could make. Freedom is worth dying for. That evening, the survivors buried their dead beneath the old oak. They knew they had lost in numbers, lost in strength, but they had won something greater, memory, and memory would outlive chains. It would become the inheritance of those yet to come. After the mist-soaked battle, Briarwood Plantation was nothing but ashes and bodies. The gunfire had ceased, but in the wind lingered echoes of resistance. Shouts, the clash of steel, the tapping of Ezra's cane like a ghostly drum. Barely 14 survived. They gathered beneath the great oak behind the quarters, digging graves with their bare hands, laying each fallen comrade into the soil. No coffins, no markers, only the earth embracing those who had fed it with their blood. Miriam, her face streaked with dried blood, placed a strip of cloth atop Jonah's grave. "You avenged your brother," she whispered. "Now rest, Jonah." Samuel stood beside her, his shoulder wrapped in blood-soaked bandages, his eyes hollow yet proud. Ezra Cole, blind and frail, tapped his cane 3 times over each burial, as if inscribing their names into the memory of the land itself. "No one forgotten," he murmured. "No one erased. The earth holds all by dusk. They cast their crude weapons into an abandoned well." "We don't need whips or blades anymore," Miriam declared. "What we need is life." She scattered corn and potato seeds around the oak's roots. "From now on, this soil feeds people, not blood." They built a small community at the forest's edge, far from Briarwood's ruins. They named it New Briarwood, but here there were no chains. Children were taught letters not from expensive books, but carved into scraps of wood. Adults retold the uprising not as rebellion, but as the night of balance. Miriam became the heart of the settlement. They called her the mother of New Briarwood. Each evening by the fire, she told children of those who had fallen. Her voice carried no hatred, only a quiet truth. They did not die for vengeance. They died so we could live. Samuel, scarred and weary, became its living symbol. No longer just the silent carpenter, he was a respected leader, teaching farming, building homes, showing children how to lift hammers, not to kill, but to create. When asked if he regretted it all, he shook his head. "I regret we were late, but never that we stood tall." Ezra passed one winter night, his cane resting beside him. They buried him at the oak, among the others. From then on, the oak became holy ground. Births, deaths, all life's passages were marked there, so every child would remember that freedom had once been bought with blood. Years later, Northern journalists stumbled upon New Briarwood. They found not ruin, but resilience. Black children reciting Emerson's verses, women singing in the sweet potato fields, men raising cabins without a master's whip. One journalist wrote, "On the land where blood once flowed, life now blooms. They call it freedom, and it is sweeter than any cane." Miriam, her hair silver, guided them to the oak. She laid her hand on its bark and smiled, weary but radiant. "This is both graveyard and school. Here our children learn that freedom doesn't fall from the sky. It is taken by human hands." A boy ran up, holding a wooden scrap carved with one word: freedom. Miriam's tears fell as she touched it. She knew the true inheritance was no longer in fire or chains, but in those small hands learning to write the word itself. Briarwood's ashes sank into the soil, but its memory did not. It lived in stories, in the oak, in the eyes of New Briarwood's children. The dead no longer walked in flesh, but in corn sprouting, hammers striking, and letters of freedom traced by trembling young fingers. And when the wind swept across the green fields, it still carried the whisper, "We did not die to be forgotten. We died so you could live."